Nice to have everybody here today. It's Saturday morning here and Saturday afternoon across the big pond. We're happy to have Geoff Thomas with us today, and Mark arranged this. It'll be an interesting conversation, and I'll turn it over to you, Mark. This is this evening or this afternoon, or let's just say this presentation is being recorded. Put your questions in chat or raise your hand through reactions, as Mark said earlier. There'll probably be about 40 minutes of conversation between Mark and Geoff, and then we'll open it up for others to get engaged. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And I'd like to welcome you all to the Consciousness Cafe on a Saturday morning. And we're meeting on Saturday instead of Tuesday nights so we can speak to Geoff Thomas, who's coming to us from the United Kingdom, from outside of London. And Geoff and I met over email a few months ago, and I got his book, and I'm going to do a plug for his book. We'll talk about his book a little bit later, but he's the author of the book, Footsteps into the Light, which is a very good introduction to spirituality and psychic work and healing. But Geoff has done healing at a church in downtown London, St. Mary Le Bow. He did healing sessions every week for over 20 years. And I thought that was really interesting. And that kind of sparked the idea for this discussion today about some of the differences between spirituality in the United States and in the United Kingdom, because it seems to be much more professional, much more open. And there's a lot of cooperation, or more cooperation, between the churches and the different groups in the UK than there is in the US. And we'll talk about that, but talk about Geoff's life as well and his healing work. And Geoff, you became interested in healing after World War II, I believe.
Yes, I did. Yeah. You want me to carry on?
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then how you got interested in healing work, and your work in business in the interim too, because you're a chartered engineer, and that was your profession. So it was quite a bit different from doing your healing work as well.
Much different. Yes. Well, I'll start at the end of the war, but I can always go back afterwards. But what happened was, during the war, I lost two of my closest friends in the RAF. One was shot down on the continent, and the other one had a flying accident. And the one who had a flying accident was the latter one, just as the war was ending. And that was the moment when I began to say, well, what's it all about? Let's look into this. And I was given the name of a medium. In fact, not just a medium, but a spiritual center, where of course these things were discussed. But in those days, the number of spiritual places around were much less than what they are now. I mean, in what, about 50, 30, 40, 60 years, they've grown tremendously. Anyway, I went to this place, and they said, well, we want you to come and join us. I said, why? They said, well, you're mediumistic. But before I could do anything, I was called into the army myself. And by the time I came out a few years later, I was straight into my career and off as an engineer. And as Mark said, I was a chartered engineer, which is the same over in your country as a professional engineer. But, one could be an all-rounder. I mean, shall we say, an accountant doesn't just have to think only of numbers all his life. He might be quite keen on, as we talked about, gardening or mending fences or putting contraptions together. And the same with me, I suppose. That engineering was one side of my one facet in my work, but the more spiritual side was there all the time. And then eventually we had a rather serious illness in the family. In fact, it was my son. And hearing what Jim said earlier in his family, you can see what I was getting at. Did you get that, Jim? Oh, of course, sorry. You're anyway, I started looking into it all over again, and I went straight into a study, which was about 5 years. It wasn't 5 years, as it were, in one college. It was 5 years of working between different facets of spiritual teaching. But one thing I can tell you, and I'm sure you won't accept it as being a bit over the top, but in the early days, I was in some meetings and I was like blotting paper, lapping it up, everything I heard. But I had one or two people who were slithering over every point. Now, and I realized that I would have to move ahead because I was obviously well on a course. So by the time I finished the course, I opened up a healing center of my own. That's when I became a visiting healer to a doctor's surgery. Perhaps you have the same terms there, doctor's surgery. And it was there I was invited to give a talk to postgraduate doctors in a large teaching hospital in London, one of the well-known teaching hospitals. And then eventually I got absorbed into the church. I mean, from the healing point of view, I was in the church anyway, but you might say it was providential that in the St. Mary le Bow, there was a priest at the time, we called him a rector, and I said to him, look, you're having meditation, what about healing? He said, I'll think about it. And he came back, he said, right, you're on, go ahead. And from that moment on, we didn't stop for 20 years.
I thought that was the most remarkable thing, because there's still some resistance or reluctance on the part of the church to embrace healing and some of the spiritual work that people on this call would talk about and espouse.
Yeah. I must say that this particular priest, he was with me for about 8 years after that, and then he was kicked upstairs, as it were, and became dean of a large cathedral. So we had a new priest who came in who needed a little time to understand what we were doing, but he was very good, and we went on for another 12 years.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And when you talked about your studies, in your CV, you talk about being a member of the College of Healing, being a member of the National Federation of Spiritual Healers, and a member of the Christian Spiritualist Society International. Now, those, you don't just pay your membership fee to join. You have to go through some certain steps in order to become a member. And that's different from a lot of them in the US, because there's a lot of organizations you just sign up and join. And how is it different in the UK, especially with these spiritual organizations?
Well, it's a good question for you to ask, because the only memberships I put down on my itinerary there were ones for which you had to work. And the College of Healing, that was a drawn out one in where we went to study at the college, and I received a diploma. And in fact, in my book, the head teacher, he put down the commendation. He said, you seem to have had an unusual understanding of the subject. And I have very, very much pleasure in awarding your diploma. So anyway, from then I became an associate, just like you do in other institutions in the outside world. And then after that, with experience, you can't walk away then saying, well, I've done a course, I'm a healer. You have to then be able to justify what healing you've done by giving a number of people you actually had a healing or you've healed, and they in turn will have to write a report on what they received. And finally, eventually you become a member, full member.
Well, now you mentioned a code of conduct and insurance and legislation
Yeah.
associated with those organizations, and those are different too from what they have in the U.S.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Sorry. They are essential. If you want, we have a number of organizations like the one I've mentioned, or two or three I've mentioned, but eventually they can come under an umbrella group called the Confederation of Healing Organizations. And that in turn is affiliated to, I say, like a quasi-government organization of complementary medicine. So all the way up the chain, you're getting more and more qualifications added to you. You don't have personal qualification with these two, but the fact that your organization is a member of the Confederation of Healing Organizations is a mark in itself. And then they are affiliated to a higher one. So it's already much done on that basis. And each organization, when it's formed, assuming you're forming one, you have to develop a teaching strategy, how you're going to teach, and have a complete formula of what your teaching is going to be. And then your members have to be insured. One has to be, I'm insured about 3 times over. You have to be insured. There are organizations who specialize in that. And then there are things over here, because we've had so many scandals. By scandals, I mean, if you will follow me, that we've had priests who have been getting themselves into trouble with some of their flock. That there's a thing called, there's a barring system. What is the full name? I often forget. It's something of barring. It used to be called vetting and barring, but it's changed now, as things do. It's disappeared. But anyway, oh, here it is. It's disclosure and barring, and it's a police thing, so that everybody who undertakes to, as it were, get involved with other people, even young people of that kind, needs to be cleared.
Okay. I know that some of the organizations that I've been involved with, they require a vetting or a review, before you can teach kids or be involved with other people as an affiliate of that group.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different, but I've been amazed at the level of professionalism and the openness of study for healing and other spiritual work in the UK. We have a number of skeptics and atheists, and other people, spiritual but not religious. I don't think they would necessarily be opposed to what you're doing, but it's different. Do you have people like that who would question the work that you do over in the UK, and how would you deal with those people?
I don't. I say, you're just not ready for it yet. Wait a few more lifetimes.
I love it.
No, there's always somebody wanting to take you on, and I'm not into the argument system. I will help anybody who wants to learn. But somebody just wants to argue and will not be satisfied whatever you tell them, then I say go away and play it somewhere else.
There you go. Well, I saw a couple people smiling on their videos here, so I think you resonated with some of the people on the call.
Well, very good. I hope I have been helpful there, because you see, as you know from my book, and I don't know how much our friends watching go along with what I've been putting in the book, but you see, we don't get to where we are now, any one of us, from just being born and go through this life. This is probably maybe the quintessence of umpteen lives we've had. I'm talking about former lives. See, the difference between the church well, I'm talking about the Church of England, but churches generally, and the work we do in the community, is that the church will accept or teach that if you are good, you go to heaven, you'll be resurrected and you'll live forever. But I say, well, I don't just say it, it's part of the ethos of all our work, that you haven't just been born to go to heaven if you die. You've had umpteen symbolized behind you. Each one is propagating you forward. And if in any lifetimes you fall by the wayside, after all, there's some nasty people in this life, we know one or two at the moment in the public view. And they, when they get to the other side, will have to come back again and start all over again. That's what I say to people, that sometimes, with heinous crimes are committed, and the people who have had them acted upon themselves or relations say, "Oh, I'll never forgive, I won't forget." And that's an understandable reaction. And I can't say I'd be much different. But when they get to the other side, that's their time of accounting. And they really will. That's just not church talk, that's reality talk. So we come now to the sub-theme of all my work, which has been there for years, is spirituality is reality. It isn't just an idea, it's reality, it's real.
Yeah, and
that's why I wrote my book.
And that's very good too. And you do say that in your book very clearly. And I was going to ask you, some people talk about the work that they do, their spiritual work, their healing work, their mediumship work. And some people know that things work, but they don't know why or don't know how. But I think you're putting a wrapper around it all, saying that spirituality is reality. And people have different levels of understanding of that. But I think you've done this so long that you've really developed quite a solidness or a foundation in your beliefs.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I would go, while I accept the word belief, I often go beyond and say knowing. And then, well, how do you know? Well, I know. And some of you will know anyway. If it's in there, you will know. Interesting that you see, you think of healing times you've had in the church. And I remember one day, a man I hadn't seen before used to come once, or come 2 or 3 weeks, and finally he came to see me, and he said, I can't understand it. He said, you finished the work and you look so fit and eager. He said, but I'm exhausted. I said, well, do you prepare? Do you open up? He said, no, I just get on with it. I said, well, no, you've got to open up. I said, if you want the spirit to work with you, we're talking about high level spirits, teaching spirits, healing spirits to work with you, you have to invite them. If you just go barging and say, I'm going to heal, you might get some results, but you don't know who it is that's come to do healing with you. And I put it, when I'm teaching, I put it this way: if you have an ordinary flash lamp, and you leave it on all night, what happens in the morning?
Battery runs down.
It's exhausted. Now, if you plug in the little table lamp and leave it on all night, what's going to happen in the morning?
Still be working fine.
And that is it. You plug into upstairs.
That's very good. And I think you're talking about the mechanics of healing. And that's one thing that I like to talk about is why things are and how things are and how they work. And I don't know if many people know the mechanics of healing, and you just really touched on it, that it's the difference between using your own energy to heal and being a conduit for other entities who would heal through you.
Absolutely, yes. You're a channel, and it would be unceasing. I mean, I'm not saying you wouldn't get a bit tired at the end,
Yeah.
But you're unceasing. And we used to do, I mean, one healer could do about 10 clients or patients, what we like to call them, one after the other.
Mhm.
I've done as many as 7 together when there's been so many in that we didn't have time to separate them. They all had to go out quickly. They pop in during their luncheon period.
Wow. Now, when you were talking about the healing sessions, and I wanted to get back to St. Mary LeBeau and the
Yes,
work you did at the Crypt Chapel. And this was kind of interesting. It sounds like you had to go down all these stairs, but St. Mary LeBeau is a very historic church in downtown London. And the church is very old. And I think the crypt is actually one of the oldest parts of the church.
it is. It is. The upper part, the church was burned down in the Middle Ages, and then it was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren, who did St. Paul's and most of the famous churches. But then it got bombed severely in the last war. But the crypt survived. Everything from what would be ground level was destroyed. A few bits were left, and so it was rebuilt. And that's what we have now, a rebuilt church, modeled on the previous church. It's very beautiful, very beautiful. But the crypt is very old. And when the rector who invited me into the church to do a healing there, when he was licensed to be responsible for the church, he found just remains down there, animals, mice, even a few human remains, which he cleaned out and turned it into that beautiful crypt that we worked in.
Yeah. Now I have a picture of that I'd like to share with people. And I
Yeah.
want to put this up on the screen briefly. And if you talk a little bit about what's going on there. Can you all see that?
Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the crypt there, Geoff?
Well, that's the side of the crypt. You haven't got the. I did send you a fuzzy picture of the altar, but perhaps I show it to you afterwards. I don't know if you can see it over this. Can you? Would you see it?
Yeah, there you go. So
That's the altar, and from what you're seeing on the large screen at the moment, the altar is to the right-hand end at right angles. This is the side of the crypt. And what it is that Mark there, who was a fellow healer, he will sit down, and then I will place my hands lightly on his shoulder, and I will do a prayer. I will ask in whatever words I like. I usually have a kind of system. Ask God and all who come in his name that, I might be a channel for divine healing energy to flow through my body for the benefit of all who's coming, in this case for Mark. And I would ask that the healing team in spirit, in which I'm privileged to become a member, will be there as well helping me. And then I gradually raise my hands, and you can feel, and then I will say, and now I give myself to thee. Please take my hands, Lord, and use them for your glory. And the hands will start tingling. And then I can bring them down over the crown of the one concerned. And then I can start, and then to begin with, general healing. In other words, the connection with spirit is in the crown of the head, as you would probably know. And then we would gradually come down, checking the energy centers, the chakras, and you might find one or two that have gone a bit dead, and you give them your hands will start, mine would start activating to increase the energy in there, and you go through, but then they might come because they've got a specific pain somewhere, so you can work on that pain with your hands. And it may not be that in one healing it will all happen. And I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. it might take 6 or 7 weeks for something like a frozen shoulder, but it will build up. So finally, after say 10, 15 minutes, we will bring our hands back, and then behind Mark here, I will say a prayer of closing down. I will close him down so that all his centers which we've been opened are closed to stop anything else darting in. And I'll say a prayer and give thanks. And I will touch him lightly on the shoulder, which is an indication that the process is over.
Wow. That was very good. And I know we'll have a few questions about that process. A couple questions, Geoff, about this. You mentioned the setting up a channel between a higher level being and yourself. Would you say this is a form of channeling, or how would you describe the actual part of healing?
Well, it could be channeling. I mean, I might be a channel or conduit, you said. But also the rays can come independently as well from heaven, as it were. They can come separately, but you are bringing the energy through with your hands.
Mm-hmm. And you went up and down a person's body as well as, you know, around their head. And that's what healers do. I don't know. We haven't really talked about the mechanics of healing on this call or on this in the Consciousness Cafe before, but this is good getting down into this because it just underscores the reality of spirituality, as you said earlier. Oh, well, and I was going to say, and I was going to ask, did you learn about this as you went through your training with the College of Healing?
Yes.
That's how you
and the National Federation as well. The National Federation, I was doing more or less both intermixed at the same time. The College of Healing was a more thorough, because there we not only did we do the healing, we did spiritual development, which is an essential part of the process. I mean, one can become a spiritual healer, but when I'm teaching, when I'm running a course, I say we're having the first session, 50 minutes, say, on spiritual healing. Then the second one, after the break for coffee, we'll be doing spiritual development. So they don't only know what is happening, but why it's happening and how it's happening.
No, that's good. And one thing, when you and I were talking before this meeting, and you were explaining healing, being a channel for a higher level being, you know, working through you, you actually get a benefit from that as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I don't think many people are aware of that, but while you're doing your healing, you actually get a boost of energy as well. It's like you get a separate plug into the wall as well as the person being healed.
It's not quantified, but I do know it. You do. I do know that it's coming through. But healing after healing coming through you, it's leaving a trace behind all the time.
Mm-hmm. I think that was pretty good, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So and I'm glad you actually went through this process that you do with each one of the people that come into for healing sessions at the crypt. I wanted to talk about your book because and flow into that. And I showed the book a little bit earlier. I'll show it again. It's Footsteps into the Light, and you wrote this in 2018.
2018, it was published. Yes.
And I was very impressed with it as a good general book to give people who were interested in spirituality, but didn't have the depth of experience. You know, people who wanted to learn more, but needed a good introduction in order to be able to comprehend some of the things that we talk about in our meetings, in this meeting and the other meetings that people may be involved with. Because you can't just start out and explain healing to someone after you've been through 3 or 5 years of training.
The the teaching, we talked about the teaching earlier, and it comes back into it, that to be able to demonstrate your teaching process to gain recognition, you have as I say, a teaching course, and a person, a healer, will be, some people call it probation or trainee, for 2 years. You can't become a fully fledged healer under 2 years.
Mm.
They're not to say you're not capable, but to illustrate that you are, you have had experience of 2 years, then you can be accepted as a full member.
No, that's very good. And you talk about healing in your book, but when you started writing it, or when you first started thinking about writing it, there was actually some synchronicity of events that took place beforehand to kind of drive you into doing this. Could you talk about that as well?
Yeah. Well, as we were talking earlier, you'll always meet people who say, I don't believe a thing about that. So I say, well, the idea of my first couple of chapters are, well, look, let's face it, scientists will not validate anything they don't understand and haven't proved. But just think of this. If you're living on the equator, you're whirling around at 1,000 miles an hour. Do you realize that? Mm. I said, and also at the same time, the Earth is whirling around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. Have you thought of that? So if these things can be validated, which you don't understand, what more might there be that even the scientists don't understand, I won't admit to? And then, but I go on further than that. I say that in addition to the Earth going around the sun, the solar system as a whole is going around its own galaxy in the Milky Way, going around over a period of about 26 million years, and each they're doing an orbit as they're going, like it's almost like a Viennese waltz, dancing as you go around. And in 2,000 years, I said, and that's where they go through the full range of the sorry, my mind slips my mind, of the astrology, astrology from mind of the
the different signs of the zodiac, maybe.
The zodiac, it goes through the zodiac. And I said, and that's why recently, in recent years, you've heard a lot about, you would have heard a lot about the year 2012 or 2013. Were you ever aware of discussion about the year 2012 or 2013?
I know there were movies about it, talking about the end of the world, but I think it's going from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Is that right?
You got it. Yes, it went to Aquarius. And also the Mayans had you talked about calendars earlier, had a calendar which finished in the year, I've not had one, but I accept finished in the year 2012 or 2013. Why did they go no further? Was it they thought the world would end then? But that might be where the idea came from. But there's no doubt about it that in spiritual law at the moment, L-O-R-E, there is that idea that we've entered a phase now which is different. Mm-hmm. For good or bad, it's different. And you've heard about, one talks about the ascension. And the ascension really is a process of sorting out, I won't say the good and the bad, but sorting out those who are ready to go forward and those who are not.
Right.
In our House of Commons, when they have a vote, probably similar to what you have in your Senate, they have two lobbies, and they either go and vote with the I lobby or the no lobby. And I see that very similar. That those who go with the I lobby are going off, and the other ones are staying back for a while.
Yeah.
But it's an idea at the moment to think about.
Yeah, and I believe different religions talk about that in times of judgment and separation of people. But I know people don't really think about it in terms of, folks who go on and folks who don't. I know some groups talk about it, but other groups don't. And I think that's an interesting area to discuss.
Well, in my book, sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, so in my book, which you read, Mark, I discuss about the levels one goes to above the earth level. You see, what we're on now is the bottom rung of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Earth is the level one. Beyond us, we've got many levels going up. I say I quantify 7 altogether, but it's not 7 levels like that. Each level in turn is graded, so it really is almost an infinitesimal approach. And the level above the astral, when one leaves this earth, you will go to what is affectionately known as Summerland, where you meet others and people you've known and loved ones and so forth. But those who have not only doubted an afterlife, but even worked against it, have not got the energy to make it. You see, I'm back to one of the basics of my whole teaching, and this is engineering or technical, it's scientific, that we all radiate energy at particular frequencies. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'm going to use terms that for most will seem funny, but it'd be better. If you're a good boy or a good girl and you're radiating good frequencies, you can imagine when the moment comes, they go popping off. But if you've been a bad guy or bad girl, then you won't have those energy, you won't have the energy, the frequencies. The frequencies are emanate from the energy you've got. And therefore, you won't get very far. And these are many souls after death, spirit, who finish up in no man's land. They are the discarnate entities, we call them. And my article I've sent you, have you read it, on spirit release?
Yes. And for the people on the call, if you go into meetup.com, I did a link in the messages. So you can go to a subdirectory that has the pictures that we're going to show in this session, as well as this article that Geoff wrote on spirit release. And Geoff, you were involved with that for a few years. Is that right? Could you explain it a little bit?
Well, with spirit release, I mean, some people, even healers, might think it's a bit far-fetched, but there's no doubt that not all spirits go to heaven when they die. As I said, that they may find themselves hovering around in a no man's land because they've never believed in a life hereafter, so they don't know quite where they are, or they might actively been preaching against it. So they're in this kind of soup there, and they will tend to finish up, if anything, in the lower astral, from where they will be for quite a time, until by their own energy, by their own development, they can pull themselves up, as it were, by their own bootstraps, and move forward and come back and start again. But some of those in that what I call no man's land, they won't want to leave Earth. They've had such a good time. They want to come back and carry on savoring the pleasures. You can imagine what pleasures they have. And they want to come back, some to settle old scores. And the example I gave you was where a woman came to me because she'd been having, for 11 years, she'd had an entity hovering over her, telling her to kill herself. It wasn't imagination on her part. I mean, it started by her being in bed one night asleep, and suddenly this energy, like a man, it was leaning over, telling her to kill herself. And so she rushed out the house, and we were on from there. So she had to suffer it because there's nothing around to deal with it. I said, as a matter of course, I said, you went to your doctor? He said, well, he gave me some pills to relax me. Of course he would. He wouldn't know what he wouldn't know what it was and what to do about it anyway. I said, you go to a psychiatrist. But I saw a psychiatrist nurse, and she said, oh, you dismissed it. So I had to just carry on until she heard about me. Now, I'm not the only one, so I'm not the great guy, as it were, but she came to me, and she sat opposite me, and I had as you have in my box, I had a Bible and a cross. That's a palm cross, if you know about palm crosses.
Mm-hmm.
And the next minute, I opened up with a prayer. That's why prayer is so important. I'm not talking about, if you like, meaningless prayers that one chants sometimes in churches, but I'm talking about your prayer that matters. You're talking to God, or you're talking to those who come in his name. Some people say God didn't talk. I said, no, but look at that fellow who did come to speak to you. God's a busy man. There's 7 billion people on earth, and how many spirits upstairs we don't know. But he's busy. But you could have somebody come to you in his name. Anyway, so anyway, we had a prayer, and then this entity leapt out of her and attached itself to me. And I the spirit started yelling abuse at her and apologizing in between for the distress it caused all those years. And then I began to guide it to the light. And you guide them to the light, and then often you see somebody coming forward, like a parent, a mother, wife, to take them back to the light with them. And he was gone. And this woman said, the moment it went over, she saw a blinding flash of light. And that's what often happens, a blinding flash of light. She saw it.
Well, that's a great story. And I know there's some people on the call who have had some spirit release training that's similar,
good.
But
Good.
so you may get some questions on that.
Yeah, there are other ways. I mean, what I did then is just you might say a quick way I do it. There are other ways of which I have done in the past of hypnotizing the subject and not deep hypnotism, but hypnotizing. I'm not a hypnotist myself, but you muster up enough energy to hypnotize them, and then go through a process of release. But so there are various ways.
That's cool. And in your book, you also talked about something else, psychic portraits.
Yes.
And
yes.
doing those. I have a couple pictures I can put up on the screen, but if you could kind of introduce it and talk about Coral, the lady who was the artist who did these, and actually what these are. And I'll put this up on the screen while you talk. Can you all see it? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Geoff. There's
right now. This, to my belief, is white feather, as you can see, a Native American chief. These portraits were done at the SAGB, Spiritual Association of Great Britain, when they were in a very central London square in Belgravia. They've moved away a bit now, but that was another teaching college of a kind. But I would attend them, but I was not a member. I found the other ones I went to, but I'll tell you more about those later. And Coral was the psychic portrait artist, and you would sit down by her. She was on a stool with her crayons and other things, and then off she'd go and sketching. What you see in front of you is just I've got the original here somewhere, what she was sketching. And it took about 20 minutes. And while she was doing it, she'd be having information coming through from the spirit with information from me. I can't remember what it all was now, but we were getting information through. Mm-hmm. And then after White Feather, we'd go on to, and with White Feather, he said, you can see the porcupine quills showing he's a great chief. I remember telling me that. But how you get all that detail in 20 minutes is just fabulous.
Yeah. Now, there were other portraits that you have in your book.
Yes.
I have another page of them.
Yes.
Let me
Let's
see.
go to the next page. Now, although we've got several pages, why I chose this one was because when she was doing this Tibetan teacher, she said he's got a yellow scarf that makes him a teacher. Can you see a yellow around his scarf, around his neck? The color isn't always that clear. And next to him is another Mongolian figure. And down below, these are probably family members. There's the cloth hat they'd been wearing in the early 20th century. And there's, again, the cloth cap that perhaps a grandfather might be wearing. So those two will be family members. But when I'm talking about the teacher, in mediumship, people will go to a medium to seek proof of survival. As Auntie Maud been there, she got a message for me, or Uncle Fred or somebody. And I used to wonder why I was not doing that kind of work. And they've told me, you did that years ago, you are a teacher. And a friend like our Tibetan here would be typical of a teacher from the high level, channeling teaching through me, which is what I said earlier, spiritual development.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only one. I'm just saying that's just how it works for me.
Now, were these previous incarnations of you?
Yes. Oh, they're all previous incarnations of me.
Or were these people that came around while you were there with Coral?
Yeah. Yet I've been associated with them. Like the Native American, I'd been associated with him at the time. So I could have been in your country 100 years. Well, I was born 100 years ago, so shall we say 200? And the Tibetans, yes. See, the family members I would have been associated with, and the others. See, lifetimes are fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
We think of eternity and eons of time.
Yeah, and I know you talk about a number of other things in your book. I wondered if you could just kind of, I guess, put it all together in a little package and tell me what's the most important topic or message in the book that you'd like to get across for people.
It's hard to give one word or one sentence. It would be probably a combination of some of the things I've been talking about. There's some notes here, but it depends. You're thinking now people who want to become healers or get involved with spiritual work generally.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if they want to open up, they've got to begin to believe, and you can't believe by pretending to believe. It's got to be natural and pure within you. If you're able to believe that there is a life beyond, and then there's a real heaven beyond, then we can begin to talk about the thing about spirituality and reality. And then, as I said to you, don't hang around. Get on board.
Mm-hmm.
Get on board. Go for it. Go for it. Stand up and be counted. That's important, to stand up and be counted. The more one, and I speak of nobody, of course, in the audience, but the more one sits on one chair, thinking one day I might do something, you must stand up, be counted, and go forward. Stick your head above the parapet. Those doubters, the family members who say he's off his he's off his nut, just go ahead. Just go ahead and don't ignore them, be nice to them, but say, this is it. I had it for a bit. I had it. Nobody tried to stop me, but, it was that, oh, well, Lord, Geoff's, a bit odd, isn't he? But you've got to go ahead. And some things like, and I'm looking at something else. To believe in the divine, that's what I've got, and the reality of spiritual life, eternal life, right? Transmigration, reincarnation. We talk about protection opening up. We're talking at the moment about something about what I'd give to people. Well, I just say, right, go for it. All I can say, you've got to really believe. Now, if you meet people who aren't ready, it's because this lifetime is not the one for them.
Mm-hmm.
You see, 100 years ago, there were 2 million, well, I'm talking about the world, there were 2 million people. Now there are 2 billion people. Now there are 7 billion. And it's going up. So you can't have all that number of older souls around. More and more newer souls are being created by God. So if you're an older soul, which I would say all you people that are here today are, you're ready for it. Well, probably already well on the way. Not for me to say you're ready for it. If you might smart at it and say, my golly, I'm well on the pathway. But that's what I say. Now's your time. Open up to it. Now, next question we come to, where? Have they got the training? Have they got the training? Where's your training? That's a question mark for you.
Oh, well, I think that's what people need to think about. And I think you give us a good challenge, of don't stand around, because there aren't a lot of people who are older souls, as you would say, who are capable of actually teaching people and helping them realize the reality of spirituality. And that's one of the reasons why the Consciousness Cafe exists, is so that we can share this information with other people. But it does take people to stand up and be counted, and to actually receive the training so that they can talk not only about their own experiences, but practice the things that they're capable of doing, and then also talking about spiritual development. And just as what you were saying with the process of spirituality and your life here on earth being part of an eternal life. Yes. And you're being here in multiple incarnations to learn different things in each time. Yeah. So it's quite a bit.
It is. The moment of opening up is known, you might have heard it, as a moment of awareness. Mm-hmm. From then on, we talk about the expansion of a consciousness. Now, you're the cafe consciousness, so that's a good term for you. But the expansion of a consciousness, after the moment of awareness, when everything begins to open up to you, it's all there in the attic of the mind. You just got to open it. You need a key. What is that key?
There you go. Well, and with that, I think now's a good time to open it up for questions. We've covered a lot of great topics and generated a lot of interest among the people who are here. And I think it would be good to hear from them and see what questions they might have. So, Jim,
I'll say I've had a question. I don't know if I only I saw it, from Shirley.
Okay, well, let's start with that.
Shirley wants to know how she could communicate with me. That right, Shirley?
Yes.
Would
Geoff.
you like to unmute, Shirley?
Yes, Geoff.
You want to? Well, I would. I mean, depending exactly what you mean by communicating, you don't mean now. You mean to get a further insight to what I've been saying. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mark has been communicating with me by email, and I don't see why, if you wanted to do the same thing, it could be done. Would you like that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, then. Is that all right, Mark?
Yeah, Geoff, if you don't mind, we can just share your email in the chat for the people on the call.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Yeah. I'll do that while we take other questions.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Shirley. And I'm glad you got a good name.
So,
Thomas.
Geoff, have you heard of the Monroe Institute?
I'm so sorry.
Have you heard of the Monroe Institute?
No.
Robert Monroe is no longer living, but he had spontaneous out-of-body experiences.
Yes.
And he, like you, he was a sound engineer, so he was very logically oriented.
Yeah.
And at first he thought that these experiences were indications that he was dying, but when nobody could find anything wrong with him, he decided, well, let me study these things and see what can be learned by them. He wrote 3 books, and you said something that was aligned with what he said. If you don't know that you've died and you haven't prepared yourself, you're kind of at risk of not being able to move on.
Exactly.
And he developed a program called Lifeline,
Yes.
where people would go to his mountain retreat and participate in this program, and they'd get put into using sound technology and sensory deprivation. People would get put into an altered state of awareness and try to find people, not in the physical realm, but a near physical realm, that needed help making their transition. In his books, he talks about many occasions where he finds people when he's in his out-of-body state, and he tries to help them realize they've died and make their transition.
Yeah. Very good. Roughly what period will this be in time he'd be working, Monroe?
Well, the Monroe Institute is still in operation, but the Robert Monroe probably was in the 50s, I would guess.
50.
The 1950s.
I'm not good. Yeah. Well, that's when he was working, when he was dying, when he died.
Well, he died probably in the 80s, I guess.
Well,
Was that?
early 2000s.
Why?
He read.
Yeah. Why I asked that is because, you see, I didn't discuss it, but when I entered in the late 80s, or a bit earlier, the scene, the spiritual and healing scene, so in Britain, wasn't a bit like it is now. It's mushroomed, it's developed enormously. So Monroe might have been dealing with a system which was appropriate for that time, which might have moved on in later time.
Well, there are a lot of people who are still participating in this. The breadth of programs that they offer has expanded considerably. But the intent is to help people who want to learn more about the non-physical aspects of reality. You can use techniques to help gain an appreciation for these things.
I'll make a note of his name, Monroe.
Robert Monroe. I've been to 4 of his programs. One of them was learning how to use energy, and I'm wondering if maybe there's a correlation between what I experienced up there and the energy healing that you do. The Rhine Center, you've probably heard of the Rhine Center, haven't you, in Durham, North Carolina? RHINE. So I've been over to programs there where you learn how to bend spoons using mental energy.
Yuri Gagarin. We had a man, you remember Yuri Gagarin, way back.
Or Yuri Geller, maybe.
Yuri Geller. Oh, yeah, Gagarin was the man who went up in the Sputnik. No, Yuri Geller, yes, yeah.
So can you see this spoon?
Yes.
It's been bent around multiple times.
Really, yes.
Well, I have not done this, but I've been around people who have and have observed this. And so the notion that we have access to some form of energy that we can manipulate this physical reality in ways we don't appreciate. I like what you're saying, that if we can build awareness of a broader reality, who's to say, what we can accomplish?
Exactly. And the point is about, I'm bending spoons for me is quite okay. I'm not going to speak against it, but what I want to say is that we don't know who's coming from the other side and who's helping. That's why prayer and connection is so important. So important, because we can easily attract the wrong kind. They may not be nasty people, but they can manipulate things in a way that we don't quite understand. So always open up, have plenty of light. When opening up is when one is about to go into a spiritual mode, is to say, I say God. I mean, people might have other ways of going about it, but ask God and Holy Spirit to fill and surround you with protective white light, and the room you're in, the whole of the building you're in, with white light, and keep safe from more, negative forces and evil. You can say what you like, I mean, your own words, but to protect yourself and invite only the best energies you can.
When you were teaching people how to heal, did you find there were some people that just couldn't do it? Or did everybody have some capacity for healing?
Most people did, yeah. Just one or two. Those who are being taught, yes, nearly all mastered it to what extent, but you might say that those who came forward were capable because they were ready. You weren't. I mean, now at the end, you'd have somebody off the sidewalk would come in, but then they probably would. We had people like that. In fact, in my book, I think there's mentioned one or two who didn't quite know what they were sort of drawn into this script of ours. They finished up, being a changed person, not because of me, but the way it altered their life, because adopting a new way of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. We don't. I'm not asking people to be saints, so I'm not a saint. Nobody thought I was.
Robert Monroe had something that he would say before, and when you went to one of these courses, I forgot what he called it, but you are praying for only the highest and best good, and only people who are only spirits who are interested in a higher service are so.
I agree. You can say it in many words. I always invoke God because he's responsible for everybody. we may not expect him to come personally, as I said earlier, but somebody might come in his name.
So you talked a little bit about levels, ascension levels.
Ascension,
that they're level when we pass from here. We don't all go to the same place. It seems that the more you have evolved, the greater the opportunities are for you in non-physical realms.
Oh, absolutely. That's what's in the book that Mark's got. I mentioned the 7 levels, and it seems odd that in the spirit world are they like us counting off 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's what we call more. 7 is a very, very spiritual number, very religious number, but we're counting off each. You take one level, that could be graded into umpteen other levels. So it's almost there's a constant change all the way through. And no, the idea is that depending upon your development so far, you might go to level 2, you might go level 3, 4, even 5. And as you're going higher and higher, you're becoming more and more pure energy. You are the spiritual mind. See, what I put in my book, and the lady who wrote the foreword picked it up as well, that people talk about the brain. The brain is important, but the spirit serves the brain. The spirit goes with you. The spirit is the mind. I mean, the mind. My mind's going at the moment, but you have the brain and you have the mind. The mind is not the brain. The mind serves the brain, and the mind goes off with the spirit when you die. And that is gradually, that spirit, that energy is gradually focusing on, as it were, God's own, if you like, paradise getting together.
I'm reading a book now, rereading a book. There was a guy named Michael Newton who found that when he put people into a very deep hypnotic state, not only could they remember past lives, but remember time between lives. What happens between incarnations. This book, one of the interesting things I just came across the last day or so is that the purpose behind these incarnations is to evolve.
Absolutely.
And as you get to higher levels of evolution, you can get engaged in creation yourself. And that perhaps God is empowering us to be God-like ourselves.
Yeah. It's very possible. You are becoming as a cohesive force with God and the Holy Spirit and the Jesus. It's all together there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, other folks here, if there are other people who have questions, I can ask more questions, but if you have questions you'd like to pose, you can raise your hand. I think we could even have people unmute.
I think Shirley Wood is wanting to ask a question.
Okay. Shirley?
It's Sheila. My name is Sheila. And it's nice to meet you. I really enjoyed your talk. I did want to say that as a healer, whenever I go find a course that someone teaches that I'm interested in, I head across the pond to Britain because for some reason that resonates with me. And I just want to compliment all your wonderful teachers from the British Isles, because especially in holistic medicine, in spirituality, in healing, all the arts. I'm very, very impressed, and that's where I head when I want to learn something. My question for you is, as a healer, or as healers, we all have to protect ourselves energetically, because energy is coming off the people that we see and that we work with. And I was wondering, what is your ritual of cleansing energetically? Do you have a daily routine that you use? Do you use your energetic boundaries? Can you tell us a little bit about how you keep your energy in tune?
Well, normally I reserve opening up and closing down to when I'm actually going to perform. If it's only a form of meditation, but in opening up, I will roughly what I described when I was giving the running through the healing process with the Mark in the chair in front of me, but to ask that that first of all that you and all your surroundings be filled with, will be cleansed and filled with light, with white light, and you may be kept safe. And speak, as I say, to God, Lord Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and all who come in His name, and also to the high level beings, the high level spirits who come in the name of God. You may not know them, but because you don't have to have a name. One, I think, I wouldn't call it a fallacy, but among the people who are dealing more with proof of survival, as I say, his Uncle Fred around, they must have a name of the spirit. But the higher you go, you don't need names, because they could give you half a dozen names by reason of the various lives they've had. In fact, at the College of Healing, they had a spirit called H.A. Helio Arcanathus, and it came about because when they were just starting up from scratch in the mid-80s or early 80s, they said, now, can we have somebody come through from the spirit world? And the question was, well, who do you want? They said, well, we don't know. Well, what culture would you like? Or they said, well, what about from Atlantis? Right, so they had an Atlantean come through, Hideo Arcanathus. So he was known as HA for short, and he was their teacher for years, HA. No end of writings of his. So I don't know why I'm branched off to tell you that, but it's to focus on when you open up cleansing. And I do a prayer myself, asking that, I might be kept safe from all who would unlawfully intrude, all negative forces and evil, all invasive organisms and negative thought forms, all harmful viruses and so forth, and then just go through it, just asking. Prayer is important we haven't discussed. It was in my book. And when I was writing the book, and it was near publication, I gave it to a chappie I knew. I said, just have a look through, see what you think. And he came back and said, I like that chapter on prayer. And I thought, that's interesting. Why? It's because I never really knew how to pray. I always wanted to pray. I said, well, because my book said, it's just means ask. Well, you all know that. I mean, just means ask. The only church makes it a ritual. We understand that. You're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were, all speaking from the same hymn, same prayer book. But God is in my opinion, he's a relaxed kind of man, and you speak to him respectfully, like we speak to each other, and you'll get what you want. You haven't got to serve it up in some kind of antiquated medieval language.
Right. Yeah, I interestingly enough, I know why you brought up the Atlanteans, because in my work, I'm an Akashic Records reader. So often spiritual energy will come through from civilizations that you cannot even imagine. And what I tell myself is, it's not important where this comes from. It's important that it's helping the person that I'm working with. And I feel like if you hit any frequency, you can hit any frequency and go anywhere you want. But I always ask that it's for a helpful effort. So interesting that you brought that up. Yeah.
You're doing some good work there, Sheila, and thank you for your kind words earlier on about the UK thing. You see, what are there more questions? I don't want to get involved. Sorry, are there more questions?
Hi, this is Carol. Do you have time for another question?
Of course, Carol. Yes, I see you, Carol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My question is, there is a man who's a distance healer, and I apologize, can't remember his name, but he's written several books, and his specialty, if you can call it that, is identifying and releasing reptilians from people that are so afflicted, and especially have them in their family lines. My question centers around, number one, any ideas you have about this type of thing? And number two, he claims that Yeshua, or Jesus as we call him, does not have authority over reptilians, whereas Pleiadians and Arcturians do, and humans here on this planet that have those backgrounds. So I'm just curious what you think about that, Geoff.
Well, it's very interesting subject you brought up, because I haven't got on to it, because as a further stage in the work I'm doing, we are into the work of the Pleiadians, and the fact that Pleiadians came to Earth all those centuries ago, and could they not have been of a reptilian kind, as distinct from the ape family, which we've got used to believing? And that's what can you confirm that's what this is about, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know the history of it, but I know over the years I've read a lot about reptilians and so forth. Yeah.
See, I have actually written myself, it might be in my book. That Darwin, of course, did a lot of good and maybe a lot of harm, because the church followed his example, his teaching that we all came from the ape. And
Right.
I don't have Mark, in my book. It won't serve much purpose here for me to show you how we went through various stages. I know you've got it handy, Mark, when I'm talking.
I'm looking.
Is it?
I don't see it. Is there a particular word that I should be looking for in the index?
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to hold the ship up.
I could just do a link to your book if people want to get it. I think that,
Well, then what it is that, we go through the history from the ape, that from the jungle ape, right through to the Homo sapiens, with mankind gradually becoming more and more erect, still ape-like, until we get to Homo sapiens, and that's when, from Darwin, we all evolved. Of course, it isn't like that, because our planet now is 4.5 billion years old. That's 4,500 million years. Now, the period of our present civilization is no more than 8,000 years, 10 at the most if you want. Maybe we go to 12, including the Ice Age. We have no recorded history from about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago with the Bible. So what happened all those countless millions of years beforehand? And it's possible that we had other civilizations here. And even to begin with our present civilization, when you go back beyond 12,000 years, I mean, apes were beginning to move out of the cradle of Africa in, say, maybe 40,000 years BC. But I say we only know that from our findings. We have no recorded history of it. But there's also this, I would say, belief that Palladians were here, and I'm being correct here, I might be beyond belief. This knowledge that Palladians were here, and they were beginning to set up the Lemurian age, then the Atlantean, which led to the Egyptian. And when one is in the eastern lands, that's the Middle East, I've been around quite a few, you see sarcophagus where you get almost reptilian looking people walking around, in procession, holding whatever they're holding. And so reptilians, yes, but the idea that people have got reptilians in them, we do have a program of root races, if you've heard of that, and they are here now, where you could look at one person and think, well, I can't imagine he's of my culture, my civilization, in his form. And there are about half a dozen different root races. Some are now fading or extinct. But what I will tell you is that in my book, I quote that in the Bible, in Job, there's mention of the Palladians and a few others. So what I'm saying is that our recorded history isn't that great. How is it that people who wrote the Bible in about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago knew about Palladians? If you were to go to astrology, you would imagine that it's all been discovered in a lifetime. But what were the people in the time of Job? And Job doesn't dwell on it; he just mentions it and passes on. And he mentioned a number, not just Palladians, Arcturus, and a few others. So we have had, in my book, I do say it's conceivable that the Pleiadians have had an influence in our life.
Say, Geoff, just to piggyback on that briefly, and I don't want to get this off track because of time limits, but my background college-wise is in archaeology, and I also got a seminary degree. So anything having to do with biblical history or Earth history is very interesting to me. I originally also believed that human civilization only went back a few thousand years, maybe 10,000. Until 10 years ago, I discovered the books of Zechariah Sitchin through a diplomat friend who had become an independent researcher, and read all of Sitchin's books. And Sitchin, for those of you who haven't heard of him, was a Sumerian linguist who devoted his life to translating the thousands of clay tablets left on the ground in ancient Sumer. And what he basically brought out in his books was the fact that these tablets documented the colonization of Earth at about 200,000 BC by a civilization called the Anunnaki in a planet out beyond the very fringes of our solar system. Now, as I say, I've only read his books. I've only talked to Paul Von Ward when he was still alive, the researcher, about these things. And I also went to a conference where a number of the researchers were talking about very ancient Earth history. But there is some evidence to indicate that Homo sapiens was genetically engineered, which is also, frankly, mentioned in the first chapters of Genesis. So Darwin got it wrong because he thought we went back to a primordial soup, but there is some evidence that Homo erectus females were used to provide ova, and Anunnaki males, who may have been very reptilian, they were huge, were used to provide the semen, and then they genetically engineered these embryos till they came up with the slave workers they needed to work the gold mines. It goes on from there because then we hear about the so-called biblical fall, which was actually a point at which an Anunnaki geneticist refined Homo sapiens to create what we know today with more advanced brains. So all of that to say, there is a lot of ancient history that's been suppressed because it doesn't fit with the traditional idea of human history. But I'm just saying, perhaps that's where the reptilian element came in, because the Anunnaki were pretty brutal, but who knows?
You touched on something I was going to say. You mentioned Sumer. Now, Sumer is where writing began. Writing was first started in Sumer. So that's where you can start counting recorded history. Beyond that, it would be, as you say, any carvings. But if you mentioned about your distant healing man, and he says that God is not. Now, here we get, you might say, parallel universes. That God is our universe or my universe. Pleiadians can come in, and I've got books on Pleiadian written by some of your American people. Marciniak, have you read that one?
Yes, I've read.
Barbara Ann Clowes. Barbara Ann Clowes. And I haven't, I don't know, I can't say they've been mixed God up with them, with the Pleiadians, but I can't see they made anything like your man has said, that, that God is not the best man to have around.
Yeah, there's a young lady called Wendy Williams, and she channels from the Pleiades.
Yeah.
If you ever, and it's very interesting because she brings through Star Speak sometimes.
Does
which is
she
quite
really?
interesting.
Where is this? It takes place. It's not in the Cautiousness cafes. It's somewhere else, is it?
No, it's online. Lee Harris often sponsors her. She's American, but she works with Lee Harris, who is British, and she will channel from the Pleiades. I mean, she has been channeling for a long time from the Pleiades, and it's interesting the forecasts that are presented by the beings that come through. And often there will be more than one being that comes through because you can tell a difference in their tone of voice and in their syntax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you. Now,
Well,
Mark, you were going to give Shirley my number, weren't you, or anybody else?
I sent it around a little bit ago on the chat.
Oh,
to
did you?
people.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
was
that's
looking.
okay.
I'm a bit old-fashioned. I was looking at something on the screen.
No, that's
Yeah.
good.
Well, we've been at this for an hour and a half. Do we have other questions that anybody would like to pose? Are we getting near the end of the presentation? We've had good conversation, Geoff. Certainly appreciate everything you've had to share with us today. You've had an interesting life, and it seems to me your observation that things are exploding is an apt one. That more and more people are getting interested in these subjects, and I think it's great.
In my book, I do describe, which we all know, the kind of seances which, was a vogue in the early 20th century and before. But from about 1950 onwards, 1950 onwards, things started changing. Until now, we've got what I call a polished profession, really. It's quite polished.
Agreed.
Yes, it's changed. I wouldn't say I'm totally polished, but I've kept up with the pace of it. But I've been fortunate because, apart from the fact that, as I said, that I had it leaping out of me, I had to do something. But I was in London where it was all happening. That's so important, to be where it's happening.
Yeah.
And Sheila goes over there herself. She's saying, she takes advantage of it. Good for you, Sheila.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your approach. And time and again, your healers over there are very much first of all focused on the client, on the patient. That is their primary focus. And then from there, it branches out into the teaching for whatever, EFT or healing or whatever they're teaching. So I appreciate that. And oftentimes people, when they approach a healing technique, will get very, very, very technical. And oftentimes it's not necessary. So I appreciate the approach, basically.
There are books. I mean, it's in my book too, but what happened, why I started to write the book, not immediately, it took many years. But after I finished one healing session one day, a woman who'd heard my teaching at another time said, I'd like to read more. Where do I find it? What book do I get? And I quipped immediately, more in the humor. I said, well, I haven't written it yet. And although it might sound a bit facetious, it was because the book's really high blow. Now, I won't quote names now, but there's some books, one I know has come out of your country, it's so technical that, I can't imagine what I'm not saying I couldn't understand it, but I wouldn't be able to really sit down to follow it because, it's like working for an MA or something, or, become a doctor of science. And that is for the doctor, that's for the medical schools. Healers need to be ordinary people. And sometimes they are very ordinary. You have a very good message from HA, come back to HA. He said, don't be judgmental. The man outside the window now digging the garden may be more evolved than anybody else in the room.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree 100%. You have to keep the patient or the client first.
Yeah.
So Geoff, what it sounds like I'm hearing you say is your intention and your belief in your faith. You just are open to being a conduit to help heal people. It's very, very simple, right?
Yes, it is. Simple, yes, but simple doing it the right thing, but it is simple. Yeah, it's straightforward. Let's say straightforward.
Yeah, okay. Well, do you think Edgar Casey had a handle on some things? I mean, that he's somebody that we should be looking at too?
Sorry, Lena, can you explain what you mean by that, dear?
Well, Edgar Casey is, they call him the sleeping prophet. And he used to heal people a lot back in the 40s or whatever. And it sounds like he's doing a lot of what you said you're doing too. So
What was his name again?
Edgar Casey,
Oh,
C-A-Y.
Edgar Case. I mean, he's renowned.
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
quite, he's
Yeah.
quite famous over here. I mean, historically famous. Yeah. Oh no, Edgar Case is a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he sounds a
Yeah.
lot like what you're doing too. And
Yeah.
that's why I said intention is half the thing right there.
You got it. Intention. It's
Mhm.
intention that counts. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you for your talk. It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You've
Coming out, we have an upcoming event on April 16th. It's our open space spirituality conversation. This is another Consciousness Cafe gathering, Geoff. Mark, you want to talk a little bit about what we intend to do with this session?
Sure. And I shared another screen with you. We're going to talk about spiritual beliefs across the generations. And older adults tend to be affiliated with religious institutions, but younger adults tend to say they don't have any specific religious beliefs, or they're spiritual but not religious. And we wanted to talk about that and kind of work down into the details and the nuances of how people, or what people believe based on their ages, and how that's changed over the years. So I hope you'll join us Saturday, April 16th. It's going to be at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time and 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. And we were doing this to make it, better
So-
for the people out on the West
16th
Coast.
of April. What? So
I'll send you a link to it, Geoff.
yeah, I'm trying to find what time it'll be.
Um,
Because we'll have British summertime by then.
Yeah, you will. I'll have to figure that out, whether it's 4 hours ahead or 5 hours ahead. I think it may be
Yeah.
5 again,
Yeah.
but
If you're
so
jumping up, yeah.
it may be 6:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time for you.
Yeah.
But I'll send you a link to it.
Yeah. Well, let me say how enjoyable it's been chatting with you all and being in your midst. It's very nice. Thank you so much for receiving me and listening to me. And if you want to, Mark's given you my details. If you want to drop a line, and we can take it from there, I'd be happy to deal with it, to help.
Thank you. That's very generous to take your time and do that. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I hope you found that this was a valuable experience for you.